He was an ordinary driver, but his life changed dramatically when the Russian Mafia killed his brother. He will never forget it, and now he's ready to do anything to get revenge. Welcome to my channel. Enjoy watching it. Let's get started. The movie kicks off with this massive guy, simply called Driver, pacing back and forth in his prison cell. It's the day of his release, and he's laser focused on one thing: revenge. He takes a picture of his brother off the wall just before the guards arrive to escort him out. The prison's Warden Drungle, tries to talk some sense into Driver, knowing the dangerous mindset he's in, but Driver isn't interested in anything but getting out. His sole mission is to kill the men responsible for his brother's death. The guards finally release him into the middle of the desert, but Driver doesn't waste a second. He sprints full speed for what seems like miles, eventually arriving at a junkyard where his car awaits, prepped and ready. Inside, he finds files on his targets and a loaded gun, with nothing but vengeance driving him. Driver sets off. This is just day one. His first target works in the city. Without hesitation, Driver pulls up just outside the building, walks straight into traffic like he doesn't care, barges into the office, and kills the guy with a single headshot. No words, no hesitation. Next, we're introduced to Detective Slade Humphrey, a down-and-out cop with his own demons. We first see him buying some illegal substances and getting high in his car, but soon he gets called to the scene of the murder, where he's partnered with a female detective named Detective Cyro. Together, they begin investigating the case. Meanwhile, Driver tracks down a guy named Roy Grow, who was responsible for hooking him up with his car and contacts. Drivers come to collect the rest of the names on his hit list, but Roy, noticing Driver's cash, tries to raise the price for the information. Driver's not having it. But before things escalate, Roy calls over his big bodyguard, Kenneth Tyson. Kenneth, a giant of a man, squares off with Driver, but the moment he spots the tattoos on Driver's arm, his confidence vanishes. His face goes pale, and he runs out of the room. He knows who he's dealing with. Realizing the danger, Roy quickly offers Driver a refund in the name he's after. Back at the precinct, Humphrey and Cyro review the security footage from the office murder. They notice that the victim recognized Driver right before he was shot. This wasn't random. Word about Driver's return spreads fast, making some people very nervous. An anonymous individual contacts a notorious hitman, known simply as Killer, and gives him Driver's picture as his next target. Killer preps his weapons and heads out to track Driver down. Killer is on the job. He's tasked with protecting a slimy old man who's Driver's next target. The old creep is seen luring a young woman into his apartment under the pretense of helping her with groceries, only to offer her a drink he spiked. Meanwhile, Killer is keeping an eye on the building. When he spots Driver arriving at the scene, he readies his gun as Driver steps out of his car and heads into the building. Killer follows, aiming to intercept him. Inside, Driver reaches the room just in time to see the old man recording the helpless girl. Without hesitation, Driver shoots the old man's hand off as he reaches for a knife, then puts a bullet in his head, all without saying a word. As Driver exits, Killer confronts him in the hallway, but just then, a little girl steps out between them. Driver doesn't hesitate and opens fire on Killer, forcing him to take cover. Driver reloads his revolver with a speed that makes it look like an automatic, continuing the attack before vanishing into thin air. Killer, now unsure of Driver's whereabouts, cautiously searches for him, but Driver has already made it back to his car and escapes. Back with Detectives Humphrey and Cyro, they've dug into Driver's past. Turns out Driver had been in prison for 10 years, never joining any gangs and fighting off anyone who tried to mess with him. Before prison, Driver was a getaway driver for a crew of robbers, including his brother, and he was damn good at it. But after one successful heist, Driver, his brother, and their team were ambushed by another gang. The whole incident was recorded by one of the attackers. They demanded the stolen money from Driver while holding his brother at gunpoint. To save his brother's life, Driver handed over the cash, but his brother was brutally killed anyway. Driver, who had been recorded by the old man, swore revenge. Just before being shot point blank in the head and left for dead, Driver made a promise to himself he would get them all. However, even death decided it wasn't ready for Driver, and he survived the ordeal, returning with vengeance on his mind. Ace, Humphrey and Cyro piece together Driver's motive for his revenge rampage. We get a glimpse of Humphrey's personal life. He heads over to his baby mama's house, where she's upset that their son is late for his baseball game. But when they get there, it turns out all the kid does is sit on the bench, so her frustration was a bit overblown. Humphrey gets a call from Cyro about the recent shooting, much to his son's disappointment. To cheer him up, Humphrey pretends to tell off Cyro after she hangs up, saying he's going to prioritize his son's game. The kid smiles, and at least Humphrey made the moment count. After the game, Humphrey heads to the crime scene, where investigators have discovered the old man was a full-on predator, with recordings and other disturbing evidence. They also learn about the shootout between Driver and Killer. Meanwhile, Killer is telling his girlfriend about his encounter with Driver, remarking on how unsophisticated but relentless Driver is. Despite Killer's skill, He admits that Driver is fearless, maybe even faster than him. Staring down the barrel of Driver's magnum must have shaken him, because right then and there, Killer proposes to his girlfriend. It's now the third day of Driver's revenge spree, and 2 bodies have already dropped. Things are still moving along as Detective Humphrey is back at his office. He accidentally spills coffee on his shirt and folds it up, revealing his needle marks. Cyro notices but pretends to ask him about his tattoo instead. Meanwhile, Driver arrives at the location of another target. He watches a man leaving with his son and realizes that the woman he sees isn't the target, but someone from his past, the woman he used to be with. She had been pregnant with his child but lost the baby, then remarried and moved on. Before he leaves, she tells Driver to make sure he finishes the job and kills everyone responsible. At the same time, Killer and his girlfriend tie the knot and celebrate in their own unique way, shooting at glass bottles as if it's a normal part of their day. Apparently, Driver has gotten under Killer's skin so much that he's now eager to start a family right away. Detective Humphrey, on the other hand, is trying to patch things up with his ex-wife. She's been focusing on getting her degree and improving her life, but after some convincing, she gives in to spending the night with him. Meanwhile, Driver is cruising to Nevada, searching for his next target, a bouncer who also happens to be the one who killed his brother. Leaving his gun behind, Driver heads into the club and spots the bouncer heading to the bathroom. He grabs an ice pick from the bartender and follows the man. It turns out the bouncer has been expecting Driver for a long time. He tells the bathroom attendant to leave and ensure no one enters. Then he pulls out a massive knife and the two begin a brutal fight. Driver, not holding back, stabs the bouncer repeatedly. As the man lies on the floor, bleeding out, he asks Driver to tell his son that he's sorry. Handing him a phone. Driver makes the call to a confused child on the other end, but that confusion won't last long. Meanwhile, Killer, freshly married, is already back on the hunt for Driver. His new wife isn't thrilled, forcing him to choose between her and his mission. But seriously, she knew she married a gun-toting killer. That night, the cop is spending time with his son when he hears something suspicious. Upon investigating, he finds his girl completely strung out on substances that he gave her. Overcome with guilt, he throws out the stash and vows to turn his life around. It's now day 4. The cop calls Cyro, and she drops a bombshell. Both of Driver's victims were police informants. Something's definitely connecting the dots. Meanwhile, Driver is on his way to his next target when he hears on the news that his last victim survived. He's like, nope, and immediately makes a U-turn to finish the job. At the same time, the cop hears the same news and heads to the hospital, knowing Driver will show up. Killer also gets wind of the situation, so you know things are about to get intense. Driver nonchalantly walks into the hospital, heads straight for the surgery room, and performs his own brand of open-heart surgery with his magnum, finishing the job. He slips away just as the cop, who was supposed to be keeping watch, hears the shots and races after him. They end up in the lower levels of the hospital, exchanging gunfire. The lights go out, and the aging cop, barely able to see, steps out, staring straight down the barrel of Driver's gun. He thinks it's the end, but Driver notices his badge and spares him, taking off instead. The cop, left to deal with his adrenaline-fueled panic, is relieved but shaken. As Driver makes his escape, the bouncer's phone rings. It's the guy's son, vowing to find and kill him. Driver tells the kid to do what he has to do. On the freeway, Killer is hot on his trail in a Ferrari 360 while Driver speeds off in his 1970 Chevelle. The two go head to head, but Driver makes a critical mistake, going for the tires instead of Killer. Killer, not hesitating, shoots Driver in the neck. Barely managing to escape, Driver heads back to his childhood home. There, he confronts his mother, asking about his stepfather, only to learn that the man is already dead. After patching himself up, Driver reveals that he had wanted to kill his stepdad, believing he'd set up the gang after not getting his cut. His mother doesn't believe that his stepfather would have had his brother killed, so Driver takes his brother's ashes and leaves. It's now day 5, and Driver is preparing to gun for his final target. Now a traveling evangelist, the preacher arrives at a tent church where he's leading a sermon. In the middle of the service, he spots Driver in the crowd, and whatever confidence or Holy Spirit he had in him quickly vanishes. He knows exactly what's coming. After the sermon, the preacher hurriedly puts on his suit, knowing he's going to need it for where he's headed. Just then, his wife and child come in, causing Driver to pause. They take a walk together, and the preacher starts recalling that fateful day, admitting that he never intended for Driver's brother to be killed. He tries to talk his way out, even pleading for forgiveness, but Driver is cold and unrelenting. Finally, the preacher drops to his knees, accepting his fate, and begins singing a hymn. This touches Driver, who, in a surprising turn of events, decides to spare him, telling him to return to his family. Driver then sits alone in the church, staring at photos of his brother, deeply reflecting and contemplating giving up his quest after sparing the last person on his list. While lost in thought, Killer suddenly appears, gun aimed at driver's head, ready to finish him off. He challenges driver to pick up his gun and fight, but driver refuses. Killer, frustrated, picks up driver's .357 Magnum and holds it to his own head, revealing that there's still one man driver forgot about. At that moment, the cop bursts in, gun drawn on killer, demanding he back off. Out of nowhere, the cop shoots driver in the head, revealing that he was the one who shot driver all those years ago and hired killer to finish the job. It turns out the cop's girlfriend had originally been driver's brother's girl and was the informant who ratted out the bank job, leading to the deadly raid. Outside, the cop offers killer his payment $1, but killer declines, saying he didn't earn it, then heads home to his wife. The cop calls his girlfriend to tell her it's finally over. But just when he thinks it's done, driver appears and shoots him well, almost. The cop had a metal plate in his head from the first shooting, but this time driver finishes him off for good, finally exacting his revenge and closing the chapter on his 5-day vendetta. Later, Cyro, who had pieced together the truth about the cop, finds his body but chooses to stay silent. In the end, driver scatters his brother's ashes over the sea and drives off into the sunset in his Chevelle.